Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me again this morning. I know many of you were on our first session last week, so thanks again for joining. A few of you know me, so maybe for those that don't, just a quick introduction. My name's Graham Stead. I'm the Client Relationship Director here at CMI. So ultimately, what does that mean? I'm responsible for the sales and marketing side of the business, which for you really means it's about keeping you informed about technology, how it's changing, new risks, and ultimately how you can make sure you leverage best use out of the technology available, really. So these always make me a little bit nervous in normal times anyway, but particularly these days with sharing my broadband with three kids at home, all trying to stream Netflix and Xbox, and a dog here that doesn't like postmen. So apologies in advance if you get any background noise. Let me move on. What I always like to start here is just to recap what the aims really are from today's session. I think it's good just to do that. And if we've got anybody on the call here today that looking at these aims thinking, well, actually, well, I'm in the wrong place, here's now when you need to jump off and get half hour back from your life. So really, the first one here is to be aware of some of the risks that a poorly configured Teams deployment can cause you. And then, once we got a bit of an understanding of those risks, have some better awareness of some of the key features that are available within Teams to help the security and protect the data, etc., that you've got within the platform. So let's just sort of recap. I'm sure most of you are aware what Teams is, Microsoft Teams. Obviously, it's one of the tools out there for collaboration these days. This is the one that sits very firmly and squarely in the center of the Microsoft stack of products. So we all know about, call, chat, meet, being able to create, share, co-author documents, I'm sure. I think really the main point I want to raise here is that the little bit at the bottom there around, culture and productivity. Now really is the time more than ever where we need to make sure we've got best use of collaboration tools like Teams, not only to remain productive and provide our services and do what we need to do, but help to maintain the culture within the business that we have. Many of us have seen, plenty certainly from the Zoom side of things, the virtual pubs, the virtual coffee mornings, etc. It's tools like these that help bring the teams together and keep staff together when we're working through these tough times. So I'm going to just quickly move on. For those of you who were on here last week, you remember that we ran a poll, and it's something that I'm trying to do each week just to gauge, where the sentiment is out there with businesses these times. So last week the answers really was probably about a third of people on the call felt that things were a little bit better than the previous week, and the other 2/3 were broadly it was the same. So if I could just launch this poll, and if you can just take a quick second just to let me know what your view is on, whether things are better than they were last week, worse than they were last week, or about the same. And it'd be interesting just to see how this changes over time. Now, okay, that's actually quite encouraging. It's changing a little bit at the moment, but we've broadly got a mix. Let me just give it a couple of minutes. It's changing a reasonable amount. Okay, it seems to have settled down now. So at the moment, we've really got, about 20% or so saying better. There's a small percentage saying it's a little bit worse, and 70% saying about the same. So I'll share those once we've finished this, and we'll keep track of that as we move on through the weeks. So thank you for completing that. Okay, right. So what are the risks that a poor setup deployment configuration of Microsoft Teams may bring you? And I think it's important to say the reason why I want to cover this slide is what we're seeing within our client base, and generally just from talking with sort of peers that we keep in touch with, is that clearly there was a huge rush to remote working and tools such as Teams, Zoom and similar tools over the past month. And that was primarily to make sure we could keep in touch, video calling, chatting, instant messaging, and those sorts of features. What we're starting to see now, though, is some of those clients that have moved into these tools are starting to see some of the real benefits beyond just those core functions, and starting to explore those and use those. And sometimes that's in a coordinated way across the business, and sometimes it's just certain users being curious and starting to dabble, I guess, a little bit with the technology. The risk with that really, and what we're worried about, is if Teams isn't set up from the start with good security practices in mind, it will cause problems down the future, and that's really what we're really quite anxious about. So what we've got here is 5 or 6 examples of where those problems can come about. Losing company data, security breaches, a cost. I guess they're the 3 that sort of pick out from there as very impactful, I guess, to a business. Teams does allow for data to be stored within it, data to be shared within it. Now, clearly, if that's not set up correctly, you're going to lose control of that data. And when I say lose control of that data, that doesn't necessarily mean externally. You can lose control of that data internally. How many of us have been frustrated in our working lives where you're trying to find some information, but it could be stored in this location, or maybe it's in this other system, or maybe it's in both, and now you're not quite sure which is the latest version. It really needs some diligent setup of the system to make sure that we're in control of the structure and the organization of our data. Now, of course, security breaches, Microsoft Teams is a collaboration tool. It's intended to collaborate internally, but also to collaborate externally, with partners, clients, supply chain. So, having the ability to share information externally, if that's not configured, can lead to accidental, breaches in security. But of course, there's also the malicious risk, where the cyber criminals are trying to actually access that information. So there's the 2 aspects there to consider. The next 2 on the list there that I've got, really, low user adoption and team sprawl, sort of go hand in hand, really. The problem with Teams is, and I'll talk about this in a couple of slides' time, is you have the teams and the channels within those teams. And if you don't control how they're set up, you will find you'll end up with just a mass of teams with a mass of channels, and you just end up with a bird's nest of a system that is just not usable. And I'm sure, again, we've all been there in the past. When you've got a system that's not usable, your users are just not going to adopt the system, and quite simply it fails. So we need to protect against those risks. The unnecessary cost bit really is unwinding that. We're actually working with, I think, probably 4 or 5 clients now, who have decided to sort of go ahead and launch themselves into this, maybe a year or so back, and they've realised that actually, it's not being used, they're not getting the benefits of the tool, and have actually asked us now to completely unravel that, and to sort of rewind and put everything in place properly. Now, not only does that cause cost, but imagine if you're a user within that business and now you're being asked to try again. You're sitting there thinking, well, I've done this before, it wasn't done properly, is it going to be different this time? So just need to be thinking about those aspects as well. So it really is important just to sort of set that background of the risk. Now, go ahead and do this. I mean, clearly our encouragement is not to do that, but I just need you to be thinking around what the implications may be and protecting that when you're planning yourselves. So how do we go about reducing these risks? As you'd expect, the Microsoft platform itself is a very secure platform. The one thing we like about the Microsoft platform compared to, I guess, other options out there is that the platform itself pretty much provides everything you need to do. So it can be controlled within the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, whether you're pro Microsoft or anti Microsoft, that's not a question for this webinar. But the simple point is that it can be controlled, it can be integrated, whereas some of the other options that are available, involve linking systems from different vendors who have different policies on security, different outlook on security. Some are better, some are worse on security. I saw. I think there was a big breach yesterday from GoDaddy. I think we saw. So you can't just take for granted that these companies are good at security. Microsoft, are a massive organization that have to take security seriously. So there's a lot of tools here. Now we'll go through these on the screen here, and then we'll touch on a few at the end. What I do want to say is this isn't going to be a technical, some of the names here, data loss prevention policies, all sounds a bit sort of techie and a bit IT and a bit geeky. We're going to relate that into actually what that means for you as the business. As we go through. Excellent. Right, let's look at the first. So restricting teams and channel creation. Now, I'm not going to assume that everybody knows what a team is and what a channel is within the context of Microsoft Teams. So I just want to put this up here to explain. I know certainly it causes confusion when people refer to a team when actually it's a channel. So, a team is a space, a container, if you want to call it that, where people who need to work together, make sense to work together, can collaborate. So, a marketing team. So this can sometimes be a business function. So your finance team, your marketing team, your sales team, or it may be based around what you deliver. So a project. So, for example, if you're an architect, you're maybe delivering a project for a new build somewhere that has people from various different departments within your business involved. So you hook them together in that team. So a team is really that container, that space for those people to collaborate and share. Now, within a team itself, you then have the channels, and the channels are intended to try and organize the work and the collaboration, the themes that are occurring within that team workspace. So you can have a standard channel and a private channel. So as an example from a channel, I have a marketing team within CMI, set up, and within that marketing team, I'll have some channels that, for example, could have, collateral, budgets, planning, events. They're all different themes. Now, what's important? I own that channel, so I can coordinate and decide. Sorry, I own that team. Even I'm getting confused now. I own that team, so I can decide which channels I'm going to set up, so I can keep some structure and organization. Can you imagine if you've got a team container that's got maybe multiple people and they've all got different views? You can end up with channels that you've got 20, 30, 40 channels within a team. And then take that further of actually, rather than just having maybe 20 teams within your business, you've got 200 teams. And that's exactly the scenario that we're trying to unravel for a client at the moment, where they ended up with just a massive teams, and within that massive teams became another massive channels, and it was just completely unworkable, unusable. Nobody was using the platform. So being able to restrict teams and how those channels are created, who they're created by, the process that needs to be adhered to in order to make sure that the process isn't something that constrains the business and the use of it all, but does make sure there's coordinated, considered structure around how it's used. So quickly, just before I move on to the next slide, the difference between a standard and a private channel. So a standard channel is one which is an open collaboration space for everybody within that team. So if you're a member of the team, for example, if you're a member of the marketing team and you're in that team space, you will by default have access to every channel, every standard channel that's created within that team space. Now that compares to a private channel, which is much more focused as a private collaboration space. Now, a good example of that, just relating to how I've used some of these, is with my sales team. So we have a collaboration space for the sales team, and there are relevant channels in there that we use to manage our collaboration. But I also have a couple of private channels that are just for myself and my sales managers. So we keep sales related activity within the team workspace, but certain collaboration is limited to the sales managers within the teams. I hope that helps make some guess, sense of the differences there. But this really is just about making sure that you understand that these things can quickly and very rapidly get out of control if they're not managed. So moving onto the next, managing external and guest access. So this is, collaborating outside of your own company. Now there's two ways this can be done within Microsoft Teams. We have what we call guest access and we have external access. Now I'm going to start on the right hand side here. So with external access, this really is where you need to be able to collaborate, and this is just call, chat, and meetings. That's the extent of the collaboration with other companies. Now that's not individual users within that company, that's the company as a whole. So we would use this, if we've got a partner maybe that we work with. So we're able, if I wanted to chat with a partner manager or some of the marketing people within that partner or somebody else within that business, I can type in a name as I would do one of my internal colleagues, and it will automatically be able to find that person within that partner business. It's effectively an extension of your contacts within your business by extending, federating connection to the external companies. Now, those external users, all they're going to be able to do is, call, chat, and meet with you within your Teams environment. They're not going to be able to do anything else that the Teams tool provides. So that's really where guest access comes in. If you need to, invite somebody to collaborate, so beyond just call, chat, and meetings, but need to collaborate and see the full functionality of Teams, access files, co-author files, and share information with you. That's really where guest access comes in. Now, the one thing to be aware of, guest access pretty much gives them the full capabilities that an internal Teams user would be. There are some differences and some constraints, but broadly speaking, it's full access. Now, again, just to sort of put some context to this, I use this with our external marketing agency. So, a couple of the individuals within that company have guest access into my marketing channel so they can collaborate fully on that. So, making sure that you understand, that clearly you understand that you can collaborate externally, but also understanding and thinking about how you need to collaborate and therefore what the best level of access is, and actually then is that appropriate when you consider the security implications too. Right, I'm going to move on to applications. If you've used Teams in any way and you've found yourself in the applications, sort of area where you can add apps in to your Teams workspace, it's an amazingly powerful tool. It integrates an awful lot of applications, and that's both clearly the Microsoft applications, so the common things that we know about, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, but there's also Planner and Forms and some of the other applications you may not necessarily be familiar with if you've not been using Teams that long. So they're great tools because they're integrated and they're within the Microsoft ecosystem that I talked about earlier. There are hundreds of third-party apps, and the four I've got here are just literally snips of four. Some would be of value. This is my personal opinion. Some I really can't understand in the context of the business why you'd integrate them into Teams, but maybe I'm just sort of narrow-minded within the industry that we work within. But the challenge we've got is if we allow staff to add in these third-party apps, that may have implications for your security. Now, I've just taken one example here, and this isn't particularly me saying this is a good or a bad app. I'm just taking it because it's got the privacy and permission. So if we look on the right-hand side of the screen here, where I've highlighted some stuff in yellow, in essence, if you were trying to add this application in order to add it, you click add and you're effectively agreeing to the privacy and permissions, the terms and conditions of that app provider. Now here it's very clearly saying that this application is going to access profile information, name, email address, company name, and it's going to access that and will use it to contact them. Now, depending on what the application is doing, the context of how it's being used, why you're using it, that may be fine. But imagine if that's suddenly we've got all these applications that have been hooked into your internal IT systems that you don't know are being hooked into, and you don't know how that data is being used. That probably would it should worry you a little bit. So, by default, our recommendation is you turn the third-party apps off when you first start using Teams, and then you consider, integrating apps that are of value, but make sure you go through a proper, diligent, secure, process before you do so. Okay, preventing leakage of data, and we're bored to death of GDPR a couple of years back, and well, doesn't that seem a long time ago now? But it's there to live with us, and we have to conform with it. So that's really just one aspect of me needing to make sure we understand where our sensitive data is in the context of personal data. But equally, this could be confidential company data, IP, trade secrets, whatever it may be. So clearly within Teams, this is no different to email, to file storage that we used to use in the traditional sense. It can be shared, and the intention, I keep saying and keep coming back to, is to collaborate. So it's not about constraining that, but it's making sure you understand and control that. So within the Microsoft suite of products, they have something called data loss prevention, DLP. That's the technical name they've given it. But in essence, that helps you as a business categorize sensitive information. Now, whether that's sensitive from a GDPR perspective, or it's sensitive to trade secrets that you have, or confidential information about a client, whatever that may be, you can categorize that, and the system then is able to identify that, where that is being used in Teams, chats and messages. And if somebody tries to share some of that information, and that doesn't necessarily mean a file, that could just be, take for example, a credit card number. If you share a credit card number just in the free text of chat and try and share that externally, that's not something that should be shared in an uncontrolled way in the context of GDPR. So data loss prevention will capture that and prevent it from happening. It will alert the user that it's happened. You can see that they have the option to override and send it, and you have to put a justification, so that's audited. So and from that audit perspective, the business can review that policy and adapt if they need to. But just making sure that you understand, that this data that's in Teams and the collaboration makes it a lot easier to share information. That's the point of Microsoft Teams. Of course, that makes it a lot easier to share the wrong information too. Malware, viruses, ransomware, whatever you want to call it, all these cyber threats, just bad things that keep attacking our technology systems. Microsoft Teams, isn't immune to these. It's one of those things that whatever the technology will be, and for those that may have been on some of our security awareness training, the challenge we have from across the businesses, but ultimately within the IT industry, is that the cyber criminals are always one step ahead. It's just the nature of the beast. They do something, and the technology industry has to react. It's very, very rarely the other way around. So we need to make sure that we are considering malware, and that's configured correctly. And again, Microsoft have what they call advanced threat protection. Now that's across the Microsoft suite of tools, but is now applied into the Microsoft Teams workspace. So it helps you as a business set policies that prevent, against threats that come in all the usual, ways we're used to, email files, links into websites. That's really what that's intended to do. Good. Okay. So file collaboration, you need to be thinking again, what data should and shouldn't be kept. And again, this has a sort of an element of GDPR to this, but equally, it's just business sense to sort of reduce down your liabilities and make sure that you're storing stuff that only you really need to. So Teams, you will create or content. That content will be file-based, messages, chat, in the traditional sense. So the retention policies is really what we're talking about here. So you're making sure that you configure the system effectively to help you manage the information that you're retaining within the Microsoft Teams platform. Now, some of that information you're going to need to keep, either that's internal policy, internal reasons that you need to keep it, whether it's regulations that apply to the industry you work within, it could be legal requirements, all the usual areas that I'm sure we're all familiar with, why sometimes we need to keep data. So you need to make sure if that data is residing within Teams, that is retained, and data retention policies help apply that automatically if they're set up and configured correctly. And then of course the flip side of that is let's not save data or keep data within the platform that we don't need to, may expose us to risk, whether that's GDPR risk or other risks. If we don't need to keep it, then it could be considered a liability, and you're not required to keep it from a regulation perspective, then let's get rid of it. So again, the system has some very some good and fairly complex policies and processes that it can apply to the data to make sure that you are retaining what you need to, getting rid of what you don't. Okay, so external file sharing. This, clearly we do this every day, don't we? We email stuff to colleagues, to partners, to clients with attachments, etc. So it's not really any different within Microsoft Teams, other than you could argue it's a lot easier to do. But there are again systems and settings, a configuration that needs to be applied into your Microsoft Teams platform to make sure that you apply the policies that you want to adopt as a business. Now, every business will be different. That might just be based on culture, industry you work in. Any number of factors will define what you want to do as a business, what your view on your policy should be. Microsoft Teams ultimately gives you four options when you try to share information. Now, the image on the right-hand side is just a snip in of where I've tried to share a file, just to give you an idea of what comes up. Now, you can see the four options there. The first one, anyone with the link, is grayed out because we as a business prevent anybody from sharing information with the link. So anyone with a link is external, internal. It literally means anybody with that link can get access to the data that link is pointing towards. So that clearly can be very dangerous, and you need to be considering, you may share a link with somebody who genuinely needs it, but you can no longer control what that person now does. Do they forward that link on? Do they share it with colleagues? Do they send it to a competitor? Whatever it may be. Literally, it's anybody who's got that link, whether that's the one person you sent it down or 5 people further down the chain. So that's something that we by default would recommend that is turned off. Second option is people within your link. Sorry, people within your company. So you can share that. Now, again, exactly the same. This means anyone with the link. So if I wanted to, I don't know, let's think of an example, send some information to one of my sales managers with a spreadsheet on, I don't know, proposed commission changes, for example. Clearly, I want my manager to see that, but I do not want to see, I do not want the salespeople seeing that until we've agreed that. Now, if the sales manager, of course they wouldn't do this, but if they accidentally or inadvertently forwarded that on, then whoever's got that link can actually see that information. So again, you just need to be aware of that. People with existing access. Now, if you're trying to share information and they've already got access, then that's fine. That's what will happen. What we tend to do, and is a good habit to get into when you're sharing information, is share it with specific authenticated people. Now, this could mean internal people or external people. Now, it's authenticated. They've got to demonstrate it is them. So they're going to, be able to log into their Microsoft account. They might have a code texted to them or emailed to them that will that will prove it is them. Different ways that can happen. But again, the point of this really is just to make sure that you understand that clearly file sharing is available, and there are these 4 options with how to share. There are implications, pros and cons of each, of course, but if you don't set this up, then you're just not in control of this at all. Okay, I think at this stage I've covered all of the sort of those headline boxes back from the earlier slide. I guess the point of this slide is just to, I guess, make the point that that isn't an exhaustive list. There is plenty of additional security, configuration, etc. And I've just listed a couple of extra ones here. Multi-factor authentication. Classifying and labeling sensitive data. So again, it can identify that maybe it's a credit card and can apply a label to it. So that policy that can look for that label can then be applied against that data. I hope that makes sense. Preventing downloading to unmanaged devices. Auditing, monitoring usage. That's not necessarily from a big brother perspective, making sure people are working or not working. Well, that's quite interesting. We've had a lot of those sorts of inquiries over the last month or so. But it is more around whether people are adopting the platform, whether there's any unusual malicious activity that we need to be aware of, whether that's external or internal malicious activity needs to be considered. And conditional access, which actually limits devices to accessing Teams. So, in order for a device to access Microsoft Teams, it's got to fit certain criteria. So, i.e., it might need to have antivirus on it. It might need to be patched to a certain level. It might need to be on an approved list of devices. There's a lot of criteria that can be used here. So, I think at that stage, I hope that's been of use to sort of explain some of the things you need to be thinking about when using Teams. What I do want to do is just spend a minute or two explaining how we help, I guess, you and business accelerate the adoption of Teams. I think we're all very conscious that a lot of people have launched into Teams in some way. I touched on the fact that we've got some concerns around the security implications that's going to cause down the line. But I just want to sort of touch on the framework that we work with. Now, if depending on the size and complexity of the business and the objectives for that business on Teams, will inform to some extent, how deep and how much of this framework we follow. So, I guess the point I'm trying to make is I don't want you to be thinking that this is a full extensive, huge amounts of cost necessarily. It can be a very simple, 3, 4, 5 days worth of implementation. But in essence, there's the 5 stages there. We need to understand, what you're trying to achieve. How well set up your IT systems are in order to make the move. The user culture, are they ready for it? I mean, it's a bit of a cultural shift. We tend to work a lot in Outlook front ends. Moving into a Teams sort of user interface, it's quite a cultural shift. So we need to understand that. Of course, then there's the planning. This is sort of the boring, detailed IT stuff. But equally, in order to get adoption up high, we need to make sure you've got some exec sponsors that are really going to buy in and champion this, but also individual team champions. And when I mean team champions, department champions, people that are going to become the point of encouragement for the rest of the colleagues in the workforce. Then a pilot, if that's applicable, won't always be applicable, but we'll set that up and we'll just test that everything that you're trying to achieve is being achieved with a subset of users, and we do that before we go on to a full deployment across the business. And within that full deployment, of course, training, user adoption, engagement is critical in order to make sure that we get the entire business along into Microsoft Teams. And then, of course, there's the final review process, measuring the usage, understanding what's working well, what's not working well, any gaps that we've got potentially, and then we'll sort of consider the next steps. Excellent. Okay, so just that wraps up everything around Teams. I did just want to let you know about next Thursday's webinar, which really is going to be around cloud phone systems, helping you to reduce your cost, but also to future-proof your communications. So this is very much around the telephony side of the communications and how that integrates into Microsoft Teams. If you wouldn't mind. Actually, sorry, before I move on to the next bit, the final bit there, if you attend next week, we'll also let you know, how we can, help you to identify the potential cost savings. We'll do a sort of a cost analysis for you, and we'll also be providing some sort of promotional vouchers to attendees that are going to, be valid for a year or so, because we can't all just move systems like this. But to help you make that transition into, what we call a modern phone system. Yes, it's cloud-based, but it's really a modern phone system. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, I've just got a quick second poll, because it's, what we're trying to do with these webinars is really make sure that we're giving you and helping you with the information, answering the questions you've got, things you're trying to consider. So, we get the sense from our clients from when we're talking to them, but I'd just quite like to get a view on which of these, you're only going to be able to pick one, and unfortunately I couldn't give the answer of none of the above, because I appreciate maybe none of these are going to be of interest. But if you could just let me know by sharing here, what's of importance to you, and then that will help inform us on how we move forward with future webinars. So, okay, this isn't necessarily a surprise. I mean, clearly a lot of interest in what's new in Microsoft Teams. But the disaster planning and simplifying your systems, and actually encouraging to see, it's not a high percentage, but about 10% answering around sort of the artificial intelligence and bots, which I think traditionally was something that people think, oh, it doesn't apply to their business, won't apply, etc. Really encourage, maybe the other 90% of you that haven't clicked that to be thinking about that and how that might impact your business, both from an opportunity but also from a threat. Excellent. Thank you for conducting that. Let me close that down. Great. Okay. Well, look, thanks for your time today. It's been, I hope that's been a good session, a useful session that's given you some insights. Look forward to hopefully seeing as many of you can on next week's webinar, which the details will be going out in our newsletter that's due out actually this afternoon. So, encourage to sign up to that. And if there's anything we can be of help in any other way that that we're not aware of at the moment, just get in contact. You've got my contact details there. You've got your client services account team to be in contact with. So that will be it. So I can't get my words out. Stay safe, eat well, and enjoy the 3-day weekend.